As the world anticipates an American strike on Iran, Prime Minister Modi is in Israel at a time when Benjamin Netanyahu is not just calling Modi a personal friend and India a global power, but is talking about a hexagon of allies. I'm Barkha. You're with the Mojo story. The images on your screen are of the Prime Minister touching down in Israel. The Prime Minister has been described as a close personal friend by Benjamin Netanyahu. The timing of this trip by Prime Minister Modi is particularly interesting. It comes at a time when there is widespread anticipation that Donald Trump, embattled after US Supreme Court struck down his tariffs, will now turn his attention to Iran, and an American strike on Iran could be imminent, could be very soon, in fact. In the meantime, Netanyahu is speaking about building a hexagon of allies. India has never been part of any formal alliance, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this trip actually unfolds. Modi's trip to Israel comes also on a day when Trump delivered what's called his State of the Union address. Now, remember, Trump was speaking at a time when he is, in fact, been quite embattled. He's taken the biggest knock in a while when the US Supreme Court actually scrapped his tariffs. But in a long, rambling speech, and several justices of the Supreme Court were present when he made this speech, he once again claimed that he had resolved or mediated between India and Pakistan during Operation Sindoor, something that India has fiercely denied. But this time came an astonishing claim, and that claim was that in Pakistan, the Pakistan Prime Minister, rather, told Trump that 35 million deaths could have taken place had Trump not stepped in. Once again, it's important to underline that India doesn't accept this version of events at all, but this is the newest claim from Trump amid war clouds over Iran and Modi's visit to Israel. So there's a lot to unpack. Let me introduce our three very distinguished experts today. I have with us military veteran, Colonel Agarwal, if we may bring him into the show now. He's a senior research consultant at the CRF with an expertise on West Asia. Good to see you, sir. Also joining us is senior journalist and editor Suhasini Haider. She's, of course, the diplomatic affairs editor at The Hindu. Always a pleasure. And veteran diplomat Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee is with us. A pleasure to have you back with us. Before I turn my attention to the Modi-Israel visit, I think it's important to play out Trump's latest claim. It caused a great deal of confusion in the media. I have to say that I was guilty of this as well, because I just read the transcript that initially came out, and it sounded initially as if Trump was claiming that the Pakistan Prime Minister may have died if Trump hadn't settled in, but he was actually saying that 35 million deaths could have taken place. The Pakistan Prime Minister told Donald Trump had Trump not stepped in. Anyhow, let's take a look at exactly what Trump said.
We're proudly restoring safety for Americans at home, and we are also restoring security for Americans abroad. Our country has never been stronger. In my first 10 months, I ended 8 wars, including Cambodia. Isn't it funny? Sick people. Cambodia and Thailand, Pakistan and India. Would have been a nuclear war. 35 million people said the Prime Minister of Pakistan would have died if it were not for my involvement. Kosovo and Serbia, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Congo and Rwanda, and of course the war in Gaza, which proceeds at a very low level. It's just about there.
So, I'm just smiling because I don't know what else to do. I will, in this case, start with Suhasini, because she did alert me to my error, because, as I said, I, like many other people, just read the transcript, and the transcript sounded like he was saying that the Pakistan Prime Minister would have died had Trump not stepped in. Now we know the syntax better, Suhasini, and apart from it being a lesson for all forthcoming lessons on English grammar, what do you make of this comment? We always say we can't keep taking Trump seriously on this because he adds a layer to each time he talks about his purported role in Operation Sindoor. Now he's saying basically that Pakistan would have faced annihilation had Trump not stepped in. At least that part of the sentence is clear.
I think he's giving you a version of what he has said already, which was that the India Pakistan war was quote unquote about to go nuclear. It's been bolstered because he held the Board of Peace meeting over Gaza security and Gaza reconstruction a week ago, where the Pakistan Prime Minister was once again there and gave him fulsome praise for having averted this conflict and of having saved lives, certainly in Pakistan, if not across the subcontinent. So I think that's really what you're seeing, Trump taking credit. Once again, there's obviously also an element of wanting to somehow repeat himself. And, somebody is doing the counting of the exact number, but according to I think one of the agencies, it's more than 90 times that he has said exactly this. And it's more or less, if you repeat it enough times, then the idea that it is an established truth. I think that's what he's essentially aiming at. But it wasn't. I listened to the entire speech, and it was his longest. It was one of the longest State of the Unions, if not the longest. And it wasn't the main fulcrum of the rest of his Union speech.
Yeah, and we'll come to some other parts of Trump's policies that impact us, in particular the tariffs. But I want to just bring in Ambassador Mukherjee and Colonel Agarwal also for quick reactions and comments on this newest Trump claim. So Hasni says he's made the same claim 90 times. Somebody's counted that, but he actually adds a new detail. For example, he changes the number of jets that he claims have gone down. This time he said that 35 million people would have died, and he's attributing this to the Pakistan Prime Minister, no less. Do we continue to ignore this? Do we continue to just not rebut him because he's like a stuck record, with variations?
Actually, Barkha, President Trump demonstrated in his speech today, which, like Suhasini, I also heard till the end. And I remembered what my teacher in class 4 had taught me. It's called splitting the infinitive. That's why you thought that he said the Pakistani Prime Minister would have died, because he said Pakistani Prime Minister would have died 35 million. Pakistani Prime Minister, then he paused and he said 35 million people died, but he put died before 35 million. So it's called in English grammar, Wren and Martin, which I learned in school, splitting the infinitive. And so, like you, Barkha, I rang up a lot of friends and said, hey, he's now saying that the Pakistani Prime Minister would have died but for him. So it's not just a victory, it's an extra victory one he can put because he saved the Pakistani Prime Minister from death. And I'm sure a lot of people would have thought that. So I'm grateful to Suhasini for correcting us on this. The other very interesting part of his speech was that he went on and on about the dangerous Somalis who are destroying law and order in the United States. And this was because he hates the young Somali lady with the headscarf. Poor thing, she was sitting there, I think in the 5th row, and she's a Democrat, and she's had the courage to stand up to him. Which is why, if you heard the first part of his speech, you would have thought that Somalia has actually invaded the United States, because he mentioned so many states where the Somalis are just, destroying the structure of the United States, etc. But more than that, his speech, which was rambling, was trying to establish that without him, United States cannot continue. He is the one who's brought order back. You could almost think that he was pleading for a 3rd extended term, the way he was saying. He was trying to give the impression that without him at the helm, US would have gone down because it was already rock bottom when Biden finished his term. And he is the person who is responsible for bringing it back. And so actually all those conflicts which he said in the beginning, and I think Suhasini, he said it a slightly few more times than you said, where there are conflicting reports, but I think it's at least 20 more times than the figure you gave is what people have told me. I haven't been counting. I think his address lacked a statesman-like approach, which one would expect from the President of the United States. It lacked a certain vision for the United States, and it was just self-glorification and self-praise, apart from making the point again and again that thank God he is there, he has brought back order, etc. But that would be my immediate comment on Trump.
So So, Colonel Agarwal, let me bring your perspective and then we'll open this up to all the other things that are in parallel happening in the world, including our Prime Minister's visit to Israel. But just a quick take on this ever-changing, yet ever steadfast claim on Op Sindoor. Actually, it doesn't paint Pakistan in a very formidable light, because if the Pakistan Prime Minister purportedly said, oh my God, 35 million people in our country are going to die, then I'm not sure Pakistan would appreciate even being represented like this. Your take?
Yeah, Barkha, I mean, it's this sentence and this claim which is coming every time and again, and Suhasini has counted 90, it may be few more. It is not no longer about taking credit. To me, it is a sense of frustration which Trump is expressing, because at every forum and every large forum, whether it is Board of Peace, whether it is Sharm el Sheikh, whether it is Davos, every time he wants to, he's tried to pitch this thing that he stopped the India-Pakistan war, and India has refused to take the bait. So, like you said, that will India respond or not? We have gone way past that, time of responding. So, but this is an act of frustration. The other thing, a small thing that I would like to add is that unlike many other State of Union addresses which previous US presidents have given, and even Trump in his Trump 1.0, the foreign policy element was a fraction of the entire speech. So everything about what he is doing for America, which was never ever done in 250 years of its existence, and like Ambassador Ma'am said, without him, nothing would have happened. So these two things are striking about it. The foreign policy part was a shrinking part of his speech, very less fraction of it, and his frustration on India not accepting his claim of 35 million people would have died, or that he got the ceasefire done.
Okay. Let's turn our attention, and we'll invariably come back to Trump, what he might do in Iran, what may happen in the sort of never-ending chaos that has followed the US Supreme Court verdict on tariffs, where literally nobody in America or across the world knows what this actually means. Trump claimed in that State of Union address that most countries wanted their agreements. I don't know if that's true. Let me just get a round of comments from all three of you on the tariffs, and then we'll come to Israel and Iran. So Hasni, since you heard the whole address, you heard what he claimed, that, everybody just wants their agreements. Actually, there is one interpretation that the agreements all stand null and void, because the emergency powers which formed the backdrop against which all of these tariffs were imposed have been, the Supreme Court of America has read it differently and said Trump doesn't have those powers. Nobody seems to know what happens next with these tariffs.
Well, also, unfortunately, rather than coming together in some platform or, in opposition to what Trump announced a year ago in April, the world has chosen to deal with the US in their own separate silos. So every country's deal is separate. We don't know, for example, because if you read what Mr. Trump said in the State of the Union, he said the countries that have negotiated the deals want to keep the deals. India does not fall into that. We have not yet signed. There is a verbal agreement between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Trump. We still don't know the full contours. We have a joint statement for an interim agreement framework. But the actual deal was supposed to have started being negotiated this week. In fact, today, if I'm not mistaken, and that has been rescheduled. India has decided to put off those talks until we have time to understand the consequences of the Supreme Court verdict. Trump is saying in his statement, however, that it doesn't matter. There are going to be legal statutes, and I'm going to exhaust each of the legal statutes. So to not put it too technically, there is the statute 232, then there's 102. There are separate American statutes under which Trump will try to bring the same tariffs in until there is a legal challenge posed to them, and then the courts weigh in on it. Remember, this particular verdict has already taken a good part of a year. So the idea that what the US wants to impose as tariffs will remain is possible. Whether it'll be 15% or 18%, as had been agreed to by India, is a question. At the end of the day, what we do know is we're not going back to the old days of 3% and 4%.
So, Ambassador Mukherjee, let me bring you in. I mean, I think Suhasini has explained quite lucidly, the fact that there's no piece of paper signed, there's nothing binding us, but there is geopolitical considerations. This has been a damaged relationship. It has been limping back to find its center. The interim agreement, or the framework for the interim agreement, was offering one such path out of the morass. Sergio Gore was seen to be making the right noises and so on. But if the tariffs themselves and the emergency powers under which Trump invoked them stand null and void, should India have postponed these talks? Where is the clarity going to come from? Is this now going to be more a political decision than a legal one? When I say political, I mean at the highest levels, by the principles, rather than a technical or a legal one.
But by reading of the situation, Barkha, and thanks very much to Suhasini for explaining the background, is that in the absence of clarity, that whether the deal that we had negotiated, which gave us a slight, we were slightly less than, say, some other competitors in some goods and services. We are not sure now, through calculations, and I checked with colleagues who are experts on tariffs, whether it's the same or it is going to go down a bit. So the reason why we postponed the visit of the delegation, which was supposed to start their talks today in Washington, D.C., is because we needed clarity from the American official side that the agreement, which has not yet been signed but which has been agreed upon, what is going to be the final percentage according to the new tariffs announced by Trump after the Supreme Court said that his the other way in which he imposed the tariffs are illegal and he does not have the power. So he's used other powers which can also be challenged in the court by concerned parties. So under those circumstances, since certain concessions were made by us in return for certain concessions and lowering of tariffs by him, by the Americans, it makes sense to wait a bit and see how it pans out. The European Union has done exactly the same thing yesterday and today. They have said they are going to seek clarification. And in fact, many of the European leaders have said that this deal was an unfair deal for EU and gives them a chance to renegotiate it. What will be very interesting will be to see what Japan does, because he extorted out of Japan a very unfair deal for Japanese taxpayers, and Japan kind of caved in to Trump pretty early. It could very well be that Japan also will say that we want to relook at it, because it's not at all clear what the total percentage of tariffs are, nor is it clear whether even these that he has announced may not be challenged in the Supreme Court, in which case we could come down to a lower margin of tariffs, in which case it doesn't make sense to give him concessions when we don't need to give him concessions. So I think we did the right thing in not sending the delegation, because they would have caused further confusion by talking about percentage lines which no longer exist. So
in short, total chaos at the moment. Nobody actually knows. Now, Colonel Agarwal, let me ask you a slightly different question. This has been a huge setback for Trump. It's probably been the biggest sort of knock to him. We don't know how the Epstein files are going to play out. There's been reporting on that also building up in America against Trump. An embattled Trump, there is some sense, may go ahead with some aggression or intervention in Iran, though his own administration is reported to be divided over the goal of this. Is it just going to be one big cinematic, symbolic strike with the same regime? Is he headed for a regime change? I know that you've looked at this closely. I also want to bring in now the timing of this conversation, because Indian Prime Minister, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is in Israel at a time when there's this whole speculation. Netanyahu is talking about building a hexagon of allies in the region. You, writing, I think in the Hindu itself, said that this is no routine visit. This is not a routine visit. So I want to come to this visit. Why is it different this time, this visit?
So, Barkha, I'll just take a minute on the Trump tariff issue. So, my problem with the Trump tariff, whether it is with India or the world, is not about the economics, because the percentages may differ in the final calculation, whether it's 10%, 3%, or 5%, but in the principle of it. And I and Swasni have written extensively on it. We have gone back on our principle. We have compromised on our sovereignty when we have gone and done this. How have we done this? We have assured, not in writing, but in all kinds of statements that you can make out, that we will not import or drastically reduce the import of Russian oil. We have also said that we are ready to give up, or in fact, we have given up our deal on Chabahar port, which is a crucial connectivity link to Central Asian republics and Afghanistan, as also an important link as far as connecting with the international North-South trade corridor was concerned, which took almost 24 years to come about. So the question is not about the economics. Yes, economics will happen and the percentages will work out. But my lament is, why have we compromised on the strategic autonomy that we have so boastfully and so proudly talked about?
Can you hold that thought, because I don't want to mix it up with the Israel visit. I'm sure both Ambassador and Suhasini want to respond to it. So let's just stay focused on that for a moment.
Yeah.
Ambassador Mukherjee, it is an interesting question. One is, of course, Colonel Agarwal believes, and I know Suhasini has said this before, that why should we accept if we appropriate strategic autonomy as our defining principle, if we say this is our guiding light, why should we accept a White House executive order that says we're going to monitor how much Russian oil is purchased by India? The Chabahar port is another example that the Colonel has given. So, where is that balance between, I guess, principles that we want to embrace, perils of realpolitik? Do you believe that balance has been maintained?
I think under very, very difficult circumstances, we have somehow been able to manage to maintain our strategic autonomy. And I remember being very struck at a press conference when EM, Dr. Jaishankar, said that that will depend purely on our national interests. In other words, avoiding tutu meme with Trump, which I think is also part of strategic autonomy. I don't know what my colleagues journalists will think of that, but it was important for us to avoid tutu meme with Trump, because we would sink deeper into a morass. We tried to keep our strategic autonomy and our sovereignty and our self-respect intact by not getting into tutu meme, but making it clear separately in different fora that issue of purchasing oil and from where we buy it is a matter which depends on our core national interest. In the meantime, it's also a interesting part of our strategic autonomy that we agreed to take on some Venezuelan oil for which the Americans had no takers, because our Jamnagar refinery can refine that oil. And in my perspective, Barkha, we can very well sell it back to the Europeans, because if Mr. Trump thinks that he is the only transactional guy in town, he should remember that being transactional is part of Indian DNA from Chanakya downwards. So
Okay.
we took him off a very big problem, because nobody was willing to buy the Venezuelan oil that he had. At the same time, we've also made it clear that the Biden administration had asked us to buy more Russian oil because they wanted to keep the global prices down. And that's what we did. We did not have a high percentage of Russian oil imports uh, at the end of the Biden administration. It was only when Trump started about Russian oil and picking on India, because it considers India to be weaker than, let's say, China. And he never picked on the Europeans, who continue to buy a lot of stuff and continue to buy a lot of stuff from Russia. So
Yeah.
I have a slight disagreement with my colleagues here. I don't think we've compromised our sovereignty. I think in a very difficult situation where there were not too many options available, we have preserved our self-respect, and we have made it clear that purchase of oil from whichever source is depends on our national interest. Chabahar port, Barkha, is different. In Chabahar port, we had earlier got an exemption. When that exemption will finish in end of April, if we don't move out, then our entities who are working there, Indian entities, they would face very strict sanctions, which they can't afford to. So we are trying to get an exemption from Trump to continue Chabahar,
Okay.
because
Okay.
Chabahar has an exemption till 30th April.
Okay, a very quick response on all of this from Suhasini, because I do want to come to Israel and Iran and West Asia. Is Russian oil a non-issue? is an interesting question to think about. After the Supreme Court of America has struck down Trump's tariffs, even factually, although the White House executive order very clearly said that India had agreed to stop this, that was not in the joint statement, which is what many diplomats have pointed out. Point one. Point two, we didn't, even till January, which is when I checked the last figures, 22% of our supplies were still from Russia. We had decreased but not stopped. So it hasn't stopped. Do you think it ceased to be an issue, or do you think, despite the Supreme Court verdict, the Trump administration will continue to make it an issue?
Barkha, I think it's the only issue in a sense, because I think when it comes to tariffs, India has, is in negotiations, even if they are paused at the moment, with the US. The real question is India a country that has consistently said it does not accept unilateral sanctions? And remember, since from 2022 until 2025, India pushed back on the US under the Biden administration and Europe when they tried to bring about sanctions to stop India's purchase of Russian oil. So the idea that we are so helpless today, but we weren't helpless 6 months ago or a year ago, I think all that has changed is that Mr. Trump is just bullying some more. And Mr. Trump is bullying India on the basis of his successful bullying of India in 2017, when India gave up Iranian oil and then gave up Venezuelan oil. Today, Mr. Trump says, you can't buy Russian oil as well, but now you must buy more US oil. And yes, you can buy Venezuelan oil that the US gets a stake in. If India is going to accept all 5 of these diktats from the US, I think the issue is much bigger than about trade, about what individual companies will suffer. It is actually at the core of what kind of foreign policy India wants to run. If everything is a transaction, at the end of the day, India will be left with only transactions, no friends. And that's what we are seeing. To give up the friendship of a country like Iran, which is a very difficult neighbor's neighbor, to set yourself as a non-credible buyer. Because essentially what you're saying is, I will buy from any country depending on whether the US tells me I can or cannot do. Thirdly, in order to fulfill the kind of commitments we have made to other countries. So in 2024, for example, Prime Minister Modi went to Moscow and said, we will be taking India-Russia bilateral trade to $100 billion by 2030. India and the EU have now signed an agreement that also promises to take trade to certain amounts. India is, of course, signing trade deals with so many other entities, with the UK, with the GCC, with Australia. All of them come with commitments that we are going to increase our purchase of things from them and increase trade from them. None of those are possible if we are going to submit to the American diktats that we give up Russian oil, that we buy American oil, and that we invest or trade with the US to the tune of $500 billion over 5 years. So I think it's the only issue over here. As far as trade tariffs go, these are a negotiation. The US has shown itself to be completely unreasonable on the issue. And India has to decide whether it goes the way of the other countries like European Union, Japan, Korea, which are allies of the US, and accept those tariffs, or go the way of other countries that have so far not engaged, and I mean Russia and China and others.
Okay, so a clear divergence of opinion on how India has handled this issue. But since Suhasini did mention Iran and how she thinks that the first mistake was to accept the American pressure on the purchase of oil from Iran, now we are faced with this very complex situation where Trump has briefed members not just of his own administration, but also of the political opposition. India has asked citizens to leave Iran if they can. And all of this is happening at a time when Prime Minister Modi is in Israel. I want to bring in Colonel Agarwal here. You said this is not a routine visit, Prime Minister Modi in Israel. Let's just turn our attention there. Let's turn our attention to what might happen. How is India going to walk this tightrope between Netanyahu's seeking of a hexagon of allies and India's historic relations with Iran, albeit with the disagreement that the three of you have on how India handled the issue of oil?
So, Barkha, as far as when I said it's not a routine diplomatic visit, because it is happening in very, very gross, uncertain, situation. You have the war which could break out with Iran any time, today, tomorrow, day after. It has been, going on since 12th of January that the buildup is taking place. There are severe fault lines that are emerging within the Arabian Peninsula, as it is with previous allies, Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc., trying to find their own space and forging military blocks. And plus, Gaza, remember, is still not sorted out. The Board of Peace meeting, which took place on 19th February, they could muster up just about $7 billion for reconstruction of Gaza. $10 billion was what US offered from its side, making it 17 billion. And most importantly, the International Stabilization Force has not been able to get anything except Indonesia committing 8,000 troops, which is grossly inadequate. So, and they themselves have said, the commander from US who has been nominated for the commander of the ISF, that it may take the whole of 2026 for the ISF to fully muster up and get deployed. So these are very unusual and uncertain circumstances. Coming to what this visit could take place and happen, I would say these are two different parts in the visit. One is the business part and the security business part of it, and second is the geopolitics. So all these fanciful statements of Netanyahu about Hexagon alliance and radical Shia and Sunni troubling and destroying the region, I don't think they will hold any water as far as India is concerned, for two reasons. Firstly, like Suhasini said in her opening statement, we have not been forming any military alliances ever in the past and are unlikely to become a part of it. And secondly, we don't see any country in the region as a Sunni or a Shia radical state. We have very close convergence, strategic partnerships with whether it is Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, UAE. So we don't see the kind of vision that Netanyahu has. So I don't think
okay. I can hear Colonel Agarwal, but suddenly I can't see him. I don't know why. So let me, oh, there you are. Oh, we got you back. Yeah, complete your thoughts, sir.
Yeah. So I don't see any convergence or anything as far as this Hexagon thing is concerned. But yes, on business and security is one part where India would like to derive the maximum mileage out of this visit, because the kind of traction that has been given. And mind you, it is the Israelis who have been telling us that the Modi is going to visit us on 25th and 26th, and not the Indian government. We were sitting tight, watching the situation unfold in West Asia, whether the visit will take place at all or not. But Netanyahu was the first guy who told us, the Israeli ambassador in Delhi told us that the visit is taking place on 25th and 26th. So business part, I think India will be able to extract a good amount out of it, whether it is in terms of weapon platform, the iron beam, the overall construction of the Sudarshan shield that we are talking about. But I don't see anything happening on the Hexagon part of it.
I think that's absolutely a fair conclusion. So Hasni, let me bring you in before I give Ambassador Mukherjee the closing word on what we might be looking for on this visit, and also what it is going to be a trapeze artist type diplomacy required if Trump does strike Iran. And I should also say that it has been interesting, and I think you did some reporting on this, that India did eventually sign the statement that did condemn Israel's sort of actions in the West Bank. What do you see unfolding? I mean, West Asia is very unpredictable right now.
Barkha, I think Colonel Rajiv is correct when he says that this is a very unusual visit. We can't see it as just a pure bilateral visit. That hasn't happened since 2017, a visit by Prime Minister Modi. So this was literally his turn. Remember, last year, Prime Minister Netanyahu had planned and announced visits 3 times to India and cancelled them at the last minute because of the security situation. So it is quite significant that Prime Minister Modi has not cancelled his visit given the US threats on Iran. Because not only is this about circumventing an actual war in the region, it is that Iran has in the past shown that when they are targeted, they will see Israel as a legitimate target as well. So you don't want to put your prime minister in that situation. Yeah. Finally, it's the optics of being over there. In terms of what the takeaways we are being told about so far, because it has been fairly quiet kind of visit, as Colonel Rajiv said, from the Indian point of view, not speaking too much about what's planned. But what we know is the trade pact being taken forward, the first talks just yesterday, labor force, Indian labor that has been replacing Palestinian labor in Israel consistently since 2024. We're expecting to see an explosion in that, more of them. Israel certainly needs more labor as construction projects and all the rest. Technology will be a big part of it. The Prime Minister is at an innovation event tomorrow. Security and defense, of course, I think Colonel Rajiv said Iron Dome. There's a lot of special technology that Israel may be talking about with India, may or may not be announced. I think in the next hour or so, or the few hours or so, what we're going to watch very closely is Prime Minister Modi's statement to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, where he speaks about the India-Israel relationship. But somewhere there, Barkha, the bilateral will be overshadowed by what is happening in the region and what it means eventually for India's ties with Iran, with Palestine. Also, if you talk about the hexagonal alliance, when Prime Minister Netanyahu says it's India, Greece, Cyprus, an Arab nation, an African nation, and an Asian nation. Those three, he said, I'll tell you the names later. He's essentially, and they are against radical Shia and Sunni Islamic axes in the region. He's saying India is going to get involved in West Asia. B, he is saying he's essentially targeting Iran, but also Qatar. He's targeting Turkey. He's targeting Saudi Arabia. Now, these are all countries that have complex relations with India, which don't require to be mixed up with whatever Israel is planning over there. So I think everybody will be watching for that very closely. It's important that Mr. Netanyahu made the announcement of the Hexagon alliance during a cabinet meeting in the context of his diplomatic conversations that he planned to have with Prime Minister Modi. It wasn't something he spoke about separately.
So, Ambassador Mukherjee, let me give you the last word. I think conventionally we as in the Indian state, has never been part of any alliance. I don't think India would necessarily want to get pulled into this sort of minefield that is West Asia. The countries that Israel has a problem with are not countries that India necessarily has a problem with. But Netanyahu may see this hexagonal alliance as a counter to what has sometimes been loosely called an Islamic NATO, which is sort of the Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, that kind of axis. It's very interesting. You ask Indians, foreign policy has become something that now everybody has an opinion on, maybe not a very well-formed one. Our audience certainly says 56% say keep away from any such alliance. Only 26% think that it might be smart to align more closely with Israel, but an overwhelming number of Indians say maintain your independence, the strategic autonomy that we've been talking about. What are going to be the things you'll be looking out for in this visit? What will be the tightrope that India will have to walk, keeping its historic relationship with Iran, keeping its enhanced relationship with Israel, but also its relationships in the region? Asim Munir, I think, is in Qatar today, if I'm not wrong, or was. So, there's also all of that to think about. Ambassador Mukherjee, last word.
I just wanted to say, first of all, that it's not true that India in the past did not enter into one military alliance. If you recall, in 1971, when Mrs. Gandhi was Prime Minister, we actually entered into a mutual defense pact with the then USSR. And if you look at the clauses in that pact, you would see that there is a provision for each nation to come to another nation's defense. And in fact, the then USSR did come to our help, not just vetoing in the Security Council, but sending their fleet when the 7th Fleet was sent to bomb Kolkata Harbour. So we can't say that we've never ever had. But I agree that there is no appetite for a diplomatic defense alliance. I don't think that's going to happen. If Netanyahu wants to talk about a hexagon of allies, we have not said so. I firmly believe that before going to Israel, we in fact met the key West Asian allies, many of whom have very cozy relations with Israel. Let me assure you, Barkha. Many of them have killed many Palestinians in the past. That includes Jordan, by the way. If you ask a Palestinian, he will tell you how many Arab nations have slaughtered Palestinians. So it's not just the Israelis who are slaughtering them now. They have been slaughtered by their own Arab brothers, mainly Sunnis, not Shias, not Iran. The third thing that I would like to point out here is that this visit was announced by the MEA spokesperson. It's not a secret visit at all. Yes, it was low key because of the emerging military pressures in that region, and it is mainly going to be on, as rightly pointed out by my colleagues here, on business and defense. We have some very important defense deals which we are going to do with the Israelis, and as far as the countries that you mentioned, we have very serious problems with Turkey. Very serious
Yes,
problems. They
yes,
have been
Turkey.
very, very friendly with us. If the Turks don't like us visiting Israel, that's cool by me. I hope they are enraged by our visit to Israel, because they have been absolutely crossed all possible red lines in their support to Pakistan, and in their desire to intervene indirectly but in a heavy-handed manner in case there is another op Sindhu or some other op when Pakistan attacks us next. And finally, I'd like to say, Barkha, on this matter, that we have made it very clear always to the Israelis that they are a very special strategic partner for India, because they have always stood by us when very close friends have not stood by us. Israel has always stood by us, and the Israelis appreciate the fact that there has never been anti-Semitism in India when there is so much anti-Semitism even in United States and certainly all over Europe, including in France where I've served. There used to be always a Friday evening attack on the synagogue near my house in Paris in the 5.5 years that I spent there. So I think that this visit is very important for us. This visit actually enhances our strategic autonomy, because we are making new friends and new strategic partnerships in order to combat a situation created by Trump, who is destroying the existing world order without allowing a new world order to emerge. So I always call it an emerging world disorder, which he is bringing about, and he is not allowing another order to come through peacefully. And finally, on Iran, I firmly believe that he is not going to strike Iran. He is going to make a deal, because I'm told that Vance and his chief of staff have told him privately that there will be American casualties. Can he afford
Yeah,
American body bags coming home before the midterms? I'll tell you one thing, Barkha, I've served in New York. It is amazing how Americans, being a superpower, are so sensitive to body bags. They don't like taking casualties. They don't like boots on the ground. But everything, cannot always be taken out from the air. And this is not Venezuela. This is Iran. This is a millennia-old civilization. The reply of the Iranian foreign minister when Trump wrote in his social harmony post or whatever it's called, why have they not yet capitulated? And he answered, that's because you don't know Iran. Iran never capitulates. And that is very true. It's a nation built on martyrdom. So I don't think he's going to attack. He's going to keep circling around them, like hawks
yeah.
coming in on a target. But in the last minute, he's going to fly off. That's my assessment. I'm sticking my neck out on this, but that is my assessment.
All right, that's a very, I think, a significant assessment there, and it's absolutely, been well documented in American media that his advisors are telling him that just doing a symbolic cinematic strike is not going to change the leadership, so you won't achieve anything, and for anything more, you need to have the appetite for casualties. He's already, by the way, I saw on CNN America reported that he already has the lowest popularity ratings of any American president in history. So he's going to have to walk this one very carefully. Thank you very much. It's going to be very important how Prime Minister Modi, what he says, what he doesn't say, what he keeps in, what he leaves out. I'm sure we'll have you all back once we have more on Modi's visit to Israel, to Colonel Agarwal, Suhasini Haider, and Ambassador Mukherjee. Always a pleasure. And to our audience, thank you and see you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.